So, in the last lesson, I asked you to make the program ask for the user's name, and after entering it, it would say, hello, user, nice to meet you, and then it's going to ask for the user year, the year that the user was born in, and then it's going to calculate how old the user is. So, this is what my code looks like. First, I'm storing the input from the question, what is your name, into a variable called name, and then I simply print that out. Since I already have the name, I just type out hello, name, and nice to meet you. Then I take the year, I ask the user which year they were born in, save that to a variable called year, and then I do this calculation within the print statement, since I can, and it just prints out how old the user is. So that's how I solved mine. Yours should look similar. Let's move on to the lesson now. In today's lesson, we will learn a new type of value and its use case. Boolean is another type of value, just like integers and string. The difference being, Boolean can only hold one of two values, either true or false. We can assign true or false to any variable using the assignment operator. But keep in mind that the first letter of true or false needs to be uppercase. If we do not capitalize the first letter, we will get an error. We can get the opposite of a Boolean value by typing a not before it. So not true is same as false, and not false is same as true. We can convert from other types of values to Boolean. We do so by typing in bool, followed by the parentheses and the value to be converted inside the parentheses. Certain values convert to false, others convert to true. With string, an empty string converts to false, and any other string converts to true. With integers and floats, values of 0 convert to false, and any other value converts to true. Now, let's look at a use case for Boolean values. Conditional statements are a crucial part of any program. This includes if, elif, and else. Each conditional statement has its own block of code. The block of code for each conditional statement has one extra level of indentation than the conditional statement. This block of code is executed only if the Boolean condition it relies on is set to true. If the Boolean condition is false, it skips the entire block of code and moves to the next statement with the same indentation level. There's a colon at the end of each conditional statement to specify the end of the condition and the start of the block. Every statement in the same block of the code has the same indentation. Now let's talk about the conditional block. This might be a little difficult to understand, but just bear with me. Once we go over these concepts of the conditional block, we will look at a color-coded diagram that will make things a lot easier to understand. So, a conditional block is different from a conditional statement. A conditional block is made up of multiple conditional statements and their respective blocks of code. However, a conditional block always starts with the if statement. There is always exactly one if statement in a conditional block, and it is always at the start. If the condition is true for the if statement, it executes the block of code corresponding to it, and skips the rest of the conditional block. Anytime a block of code is executed in a conditional block, the rest of the block is skipped. The second conditional statement you can have in a conditional block is elif. It works similar to the if statement, but it is only executed if the condition of the previous if statement was false. We can have as many of these in a conditional block as we like. The third and the last is the else statement. There's either one or none of these statements in a conditional block. This statement executes its block of code without needing to meet any condition. But the statement itself is only executed if every single if condition is false in the condition block it belongs to. The else statement is always the last conditional statement in a conditional block. Now, I know that was a lot to take in. Let's try to simplify the conditional block with a diagram. Here, you can see what a conditional block looks like. It can have different conditional statements in it, but the if statement is always the first one and is required. There is an elif in the middle, and you can have as many of them as you like, or not have them at all. The last one is the else statement. It is always the last conditional statement in a conditional block. The else statement is also not required, but if you do add one, you can only have one. Each conditional statement starts with either if, elif, or else. Else doesn't have a condition since it is a sort of a last resort of the conditional block. It runs only if everything else fails. Let's look at each of the blocks of the conditional statements now. The if block is colored in blue, the elif block is in orange, and the else block is in green. There is also an arrow pointing from the statements to their respective blocks. Only one block of code is executed in the entire conditional block, and as soon as any block is executed, the rest of the conditional block is skipped. Condition 1 here belongs to the if statement, and condition 2 belongs to the elif statement. For any of the blocks of code to execute, their respective conditions must be set to true. Let's see the order that takes place in. The first statement of a conditional block, which is the if statement, is always executed. If condition 1 is true, the if block is executed and the rest of the conditional block is skipped. If condition 1 is false, the elif statement is executed. If condition 2 is true, the elif block is executed and the rest of the conditional block is skipped. If condition 2 is false, the else statement is executed. Since the else statement has no condition, the else block is executed. Hopefully, this gives you a good idea of how the conditional block works. Let's look at some code now. So, we can have a variable called x and we can assign the value of true to it. We can print what x is holding, and we can also print the type of x as always and see what the type of x is. And as expected, it says class Boolean. Now, I could say another variable y equals not x, because we learned what not does, right? We can do the same thing for y as well. Now y will obviously be the same class, but it will have a different value. As you can see, type class bool, false, but it is also still the Boolean value. Now, we discussed the conditional blocks in a certain way in the overview. We will look at them from a different perspective now. We will end up with the same result, but this is just another way to approach them. This approach will give you an even better understanding of why we have different conditional statements. So, let's use the first conditional statement. Let's say if x, and we write that in. Now, if I press enter now, notice how it adds the indentation for me, because I'm going to start writing the if block now, and it knows. As soon as I put a colon in, it's going to start indenting the next statement. So let's say if I say if x, now x is true, right? So I want to say if x, print x is true. Do that now. X is true, correct. I could have another statement called if y, print y is true, right? Obviously has to be a string. Let's do that now. Okay, it's x is still true. Now if I change this to false and run it, now it prints y is true. Notice how only one of the statements is executed since one is basically the other. One is not of the other, so only one of the statements is executed. In this situation, we could just remove if and introduce else, because that's what it does. It checks if x is true. If it isn't true, then it just does the other way around. Once again, the code hasn't really changed because it still does the exact same thing. Now, suppose we assign y another value. Let's say they're independent of each other now. Then we want to say if x is true, let's say this should be x is false now. Let's make that capital as well. Now, let's say if I want to say if x is not true, check what y is, if y. Then say print y is true. Now, it's going to first check if x is true. If x is true, it will print this, and let's add another print statement here at the end of, let's specify this by end of program. So this will be the last thing that gets printed before the program stops. So now it will say, it will check whether X is true or not. If it is true, it will print this and then go straight here, which is nothing, nothing, and then print this and the program will end. Then, however, if X is false, it will go to the next conditional statement in the conditional block. This whole entire thing is one conditional block. It will go over each conditional statement one by one, checking whether it can execute the respective block. So, X is false, doesn't print this, goes to the next one. Elif Y, checks if Y is true or false. If Y is true, here, it will print this, skip everything else, and go here, nothing, nothing, and then just print this and call it a day. Let's see now. We expected it to not print this one because X was false, but print this one and not print anything else and just print end of program. What if we set both of them to true? Let's see what happens. Now X is true, but it did not print that Y is also true because it executed this block of code and skipped everything else and went straight to print end of program. Now let's say we set X to false because we want it to run. Go to the next line. Now we don't want it to print this either. We can say this is false too. But this statement can be changed to and let's say X and Y are both false, because this statement is only executed if both the conditional statements before it have the condition as false. So it will check X, false, goes to the next statement, Y, also false, and then goes to else. Since it has no condition, it has to print it. Let's see what happens. There you go. Since X and Y are both false, both these conditional statements are not executed and goes straight to else, prints this, and the end of program. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how conditional blocks and conditional statement works, along with the Boolean values as well. Let's move to the problem now. So the problem for this lesson, we're going to design a simple, very basic calculator. It asks for the first number, let's say we give it 4. It asks for the second number, let's say we give it 6. Then it says, write anything and press enter for yes, or just press enter for no. So do you want to add these two numbers? And if I want to say yes, I'll write anything, let's say ASD, and press enter. Then it's going to ask, do you want to subtract? You know what? I don't want to subtract, so for no, I'm just going to press enter. Then it says, do you want to multiply? Sure, why not? Let's write something in again, press enter, and then it says, do you want to divide? I'll skip divide this time. Let's press enter for no. Now, it says addition. It gives me the addition of the two numbers. Then it says you did not ask for subtraction, so it just prints that out, doesn't give me anything. Then it goes multiplication, 6 times 4, 24. And then it says you didn't ask for division. Now we could run it again. Let's say 6. This time we can use 10, I guess. And this time I want to do nothing. So press enter for everything, and it says you didn't ask for anything. So you didn't ask for addition, subtraction, none of these. Let's say we do it again. We say 5 and 11 this time. And if I want to just do the division this time, I can say no for these 3. And for division, I'll just type in anything and do this. And it just gives me the division. So let me give you a hint of how the input works. Remember how we said we can convert string to Boolean? So if I convert input, let's say I store it in X, press enter. Now X is storing an empty string because I just pressed enter. Now if I convert bool to X, it's going to give me false, because anytime I give an empty string by just pressing enter, when it asks for input, it's going to change it to false. We can do the same thing again. This time around I'll type in something. We'll run the Boolean command on X, and this time it will be true. So that's how this part of the program works, but everything else will be covered in the lesson, so you should be able to do this. Have a go at it, and I'll show you my solution in the next lesson. And I'll see you then.